Danny, pleasure to meet you.
G'day.
Anton from Climatalist. So you're from New Energy Nexus.
That's right.
What does New Energy Nexus do?
We support diverse entrepreneurs to drive innovation and build equity into the clean energy economy. We've actually been going for 20 years, so very early in the kind of climate tech, clean tech, whatever you call this tech set that we're all part of these days. Back in California in 2004, 5, 6, we were doing climate tech, clean tech 1.0. Companies like Tesla, Solar Century, Bridgelux.
Wow.
More recently, we've built a business around the world supporting diverse entrepreneurs in Africa, Asia, other parts of the US, here in Australia, because, the challenge is not just Californian, obviously, and we need the sort of incubator, accelerator, and funding support that we can provide for entrepreneurs everywhere.
So, biggest success story. I mean, Tesla sounds like an incredible one. Recently, what is a business that you're working with that you think has a real potential to hit an inflection point?
Look, we have that weird problem of we've got 150 staff running programs in a dozen plus countries. So we support and invest in over 1,000 companies right now in our portfolio. It's always a bit of a tricky question. It's like telling me who my favorite child is.
That's it. Out of 1,000.
A couple of good Aussie cases that I think are game-changing in their sectors. One is InfraVision, that you might have seen in the Australian media, because they got invested in by Energy Impact Partners after we introduced them over in the States. It's sort of the consortium of utility CVCs in the States. Mm-hmm. Basically taking an Australian homegrown solution for transmission deployment using drones. Nowhere else in the world do we use drones. It's all ground crews and helicopters. Very expensive, very slow, very unsafe. Great story of the two entrepreneurs, one from the energy industry, one from the military, came back from Afghanistan to Queensland, worked in the utility industry. He's like, why are we using choppers for this? We could use drones. And they're all like, what are you talking about? Drones couldn't carry that cable. It's really heavy. And you don't need to carry the cable, you carry the string and pull the rest over. It's sort of like that aha moment. Anyway, they were doing it successfully in Australia, profitable business, but relatively small here. Going to the States, boom.
Mega market.
Going hopefully to other places in the world next, because actually they're critical to the success of the energy transition. There is no interconnection of all these renewables, the wind and the solar and the stuff we hear about, without upgrades in our transmission, reconductoring of existing lines, building new transmission. We need to build as much cable in the world as we've got on Earth today in the next decade. So we need to make it faster, better, cheaper. That's what these guys do. Great story. There's one. Do you want another one?
Well, I mean, let's stick with that one for a moment, although I'm interested in the other one. 80% increase forecast in energy usage in the US over the next 5 years due to AI. So that business that you've invested in and you've taken to the US, what role do you think they play in that?
First, I discount that forecast. We're very bad at demand, and I don't think the data center use is going to grow that sort of number. It's going to grow.
They were bandying it around in South by, so clearly gospel.
Oh, wow. We'll see, but it'll grow, no doubt, and energy demand growth will as we electrify everything, all the vehicles, all the things, industrial heat, all the processes. This company is the bit that stitches the southwest solar to the northeast wind and so on and so forth. There's other innovators in the transmission space, but just the deployment of it, like the hard work of construction of towers and lines or restringing the existing infrastructure, which is probably more likely because it's so hard to build, like new transmission, is a place they'll play, which is really exciting and huge. And, I think in the IRA and the other various bills.
IRA, Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, the various support acts that the Biden administration has brought in, has been something in the order of $200 billion for transmission support alone. That's sort of the federal inducement to try to get the private sector to do the trillions of dollars of work that will be required over time to rewire the world.
Rewire the world. Lots of copper needed as well, I imagine.
Yeah, but also aluminium, carbon, other new conductors.
Multi-factor, multi-material.
Yeah, copper will grow, no doubt, but innovation in other stuff, including, carbon fiber, hopefully drawn from the atmosphere, will start to play a part.
God, it sounds like magic, doesn't it?
It's happening. The innovation often sounds like magic, and then it's the reality.
And then it's par for the course. So the second company that you were talking about?
The other Aussie that I love right now is called renewable metals. So, this is about how the energy transition really augurs a world where we don't have to keep going back to the well and extracting stuff from the Earth's crust, like fossil fuels, which was a perpetual infinite fuckery, if you will, like just constantly digging up and spitting out stuff and never having a plan to cease that. Like that's the only model, right? Because that's a fuel, you burn it, once done. Whereas all the metals and all the things in the photovoltaics and the steel and the wind turbines and the lithium, manganese, nickel, cobalt, whatever it is in the batteries, they're all recyclable. Big question, will they be recycled? We all know the story of recyclable plastics and so on. But the fact is they're already largely being recycled, and the economics dictate that you probably will recycle them because the cheapest mine in the world is a Best Buy bin with waste electronics rather than going to the Congo to find your cobalt. Like it's just better business.
Get it circulating.
So the circularity principle is coming in the next few decades. We'll be at a point where we've got enough material on the Earth's surface to run the solar-powered civilization with all the things electrified. And how we recycle will become a big issue. There are companies like Redwood, you might have heard of in the States, the spin out of Tesla that's attracted billions of dollars of investment and is doing some really interesting work in the recycling. But this mob in the suburbs of Perth, we found through one of our programs here with New Energy Nexus, is doing it with an alkaline process. So this is getting a bit geeky for you, but the other
chemical catalyst
technology tends to be acidic, lots of energy input, lots of water waste. This alkaline process, which is a metallurgy and chemistry that Australia is uniquely good at for reasons that the school of teaching was sort of more inclined to this, and it came out of the nickel industry to some degree. So they deploy it against battery metals. They can get 95% of the metal already in your laptop. The CEFC's spin out VC called Virescent Ventures up in Queensland invested in them last year with I think 6 million or so in the A round, or maybe it was a safe into the A, but they're going to change the world also, just because the way we will do that recycling and circularity will become better, cleaner, faster, cheaper.
There's an interesting company I came across in Victoria that's managed to get a net positive return on solar panel recycling, as in they make more money from an existing solar panel they bought off the shelf then it sounds extraordinary, but they're actually, I'll make an introduction if you like.
There's a bunch of good businesses getting in there, which is important that we do that now, even though the waste streams aren't that large. It will become important.
Apparently Australians are recycling their solar panels for aesthetic reasons.
Yeah.
So that's driving some of the market shift. So we don't have to wait 20 years for them to expire.
And it's a renovation culture.
We love to change it up. So Danny, as a business, if I want to work with you, what's your equity model? How do I engage?
So we're actually a very large non-profit. I mean, we do have for-profit entities and funds that invest equity and some debt in places, although very concessional generally. Microfinance in East Africa, and there's 1% loans in India and so on. But to engage with New Energy Nexus, go to the website, newenergynexus.com. Mm-hmm. We run solicitations all the time for entrepreneurs to get involved in programs. Programs means could be an early stage accelerator. It might be a matchmaking process with corporates. It might be an investment opportunity.
It's like a Y Combinator for
we're called the tech stars of clean energy.
Got it.
That's sort of who we are, and have done it longer than anyone. And I think as well as anyone, but the fact is we need many more. I mean, unfortunately, where we grew up in the States, we were the first, original and the best, I like to say, but there are now 70-some entrepreneur support organizations. We helped get Energy Lab going here in Australia in 2016, was the one and only in Australia. Now there's probably 5 or 6 community-based groups like Greenhouse, fantastic, creating that ecosystem of support. But where energy demand growth is, and therefore where emissions will come from, which will kill us all unless we stop them, there is very little of this entrepreneur support. There is very little early stage capital. There is very little grant capital. There is very little debt that is, in decent terms for entrepreneurs and founders and the like. So, we've really got to get proactive about Indonesia. 300 million people just north of Australia who, if they do what they're going to do, and their economy's growing 7% per annum, and they've got all the coal in Kalimantan they need, if they go from 1,000 kilowatt hours per annum per capita to 5,000, because that's the technology set they've got, doesn't matter what Australia does, doesn't matter what California does, doesn't matter what anyone does. Indonesia's big enough to do it all, but far too familiar in the atmosphere. So we've got to seed support for startups to become scale-ups, to become very big businesses very quickly in Asia and Africa. That's where energy demand growth is bigger than your data center theory in the States. Where emissions profile is Asia. Has been for 10 years and will be for the next 20. And that's the time that we get to solve climate or not.
Wow. Okay, so you're really thinking ahead.
I don't think. I'm
hopefully
skating to where the puck is. Asia is 50% of the world's population. It is the driver of the global economy. It is where all the investment and entrepreneurialism is.
Yeah.
And it's not where the climate venture and climate tech community is at scale.
That's fascinating. So, China is driving a lot
enormous and fantastic player in the, thank God for China, basically. They've made PV, wind, batteries and cars cheap enough that they can scale. And those are the only solutions that are actually having an impact in atmospheric carbon. All the other stuff is talk to date. So yeah, amen to that. But China's not the only game in town either. 700 million people in Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, etc. in Southeast Asia. South Asia, forget about it. India's the rising economy of the region. Pakistan, Bangladesh, those are enormous economies that are burning a lot of fossil fuels.
But also investing a lot in renewables.
Yeah, India's certainly trying.
Yeah.
It's got its challenges. We do a lot of work there with the utilities, for example, trying to bring innovation to the grid edge, where the sort of discoms, they're called the distribution companies, sort of struggle with, how do you deal with these coal plants they've built that are not being run at capacity and are losing money, and retail customers who can't afford to pay the tariffs that they need to support businesses. And there's ways to try to improve those economics and things, which is innovation of a sort. But it's not sexy. It's not a new whiz-bang thing. It's not some, bright, shiny thing. It's a better business strategy, often.
Just smart, just good business.
A lot of, we've got to deal with what we've got now. If you're serious about climate, we've got a decade-ish to get real about the shift to electrified everything running on renewables. So
the crux of it is going to happen in this decade.
Yeah. Don't stuff around with things that aren't commercialized yet. Don't do things that aren't proven and bankable, because then the big end of town can't get behind it. If it's not financeable in the 2020s, then it's probably not going to help us that much.
I guess we're planting the trees now to get shade 7 years from now, right? It's that, or 10 years from now.
Yeah, they better be fast-growing trees. Yeah. We should have planted them, as the proverb says.
I've had that conversation a couple of times. Yeah. So why this space? Why did you get into this space? So obviously, the good business angle is interesting, but what's your origin story?
I'm a sort of serial entrepreneur from the turn of the century, did a half a dozen.
The 20th century, that is. That's the 21st century.
Into the 21st century, yeah. Well, I was working on this in the 80s and 90s as well, but more as a policy and advocacy kind of thing and an analyst. Started a solar company in California in 2006 and did about half a dozen of those, and mostly sort of solar finance, solar software. So getting the stuff out there, that's what we need to get the stuff out there. Still, that's the problem. And then fell into this to take on the California Clean Energy Fund in 2015. Was recruited by the state to run this non-profit that was the kernel of New Energy Nexus.
Who was the governor then? Was that wasn't?
It was Jerry Brown at the time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there was advocate for it, but
I hear a lot about Arnie.
Arnie, well, he passed what was called the Global Warming Solutions Act in 2006, or the legislature passed it and he signed it, which at the time was pretty controversial for a Republican governor to do. But it was much more, bipartisan actually. Back in 2006, these things weren't as polarizing and culture war content and bullshit. The notion that climate change was a hoax was not yet promulgated. That was later, if you will.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to someone, interviewing someone earlier in the day, and he was saying Margaret Thatcher was giving speeches on global warming in the 80s as a proponent of action. Sure. And now we have,
It was this country's, consensus. There were lots of great government action at the state and local and federal level on climate in the 80s and 90s. fossil fuels just decided to dig in and protect the incumbency, which is what incumbencies do, but it's shameful when the political class get behind it at the expense of their people.
Yeah, short-term thinking or self-interested.
Which is exactly what the Chinese didn't do. They, the 12th five-year plan is the thing people should read if they understand this. They'll talk about the 14th five-year plan, which is the one that's like scaling EVs out the wazoo and, creating panic in Germany and Japan and Detroit. But it was the 12th five-year plan where they went, oh, wow, we can get off Russian, Arabian or American gas. We don't have to import coal anymore. We can do all these things with technology that we can scale because we're very good at manufacturing. And they decided to do it.
Just being a rational actor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it was a long-term, not just dumping. They're not dumping. They've made it cheap by making it at scale. The unit economics pretty clear.
This is interesting. So I'm a Russian-born, so Soviet planning all the way. 5-year plans, there's an element of the capacity to think over the long term. Do you think the big end of town can think long term past the next quarterly earnings report?
In this town, I think the Australian big end of town is probably the superannuation pool of capital, the trillions in that, and unfortunately not, because they have requirements to look back at the past and continue to think of that as prudential behaviour. Whereas if you believe the energy transition, which is that coal's going away, iron ore is going to go to recycled and clean, then the ASX 500 is going to be a very different stock exchange in 10 years' time. But they're still betting on the past rather than looking forward. So there's real problems with regulatory settings here, I think. And, otherwise, of course, all the problems of short-termism and quarterly reporting and stuff that CEOs are under, those pressures in public markets is sort of causing us to be a very short-sighted civilization in late-stage capitalism.
Well, hopefully it's something we can drive change for with Climatalist.
Do it.
Final question. You had your own climate storytelling journey. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
You mentioned South by Southwest. We won an award there, the Best Green Podcast in 2023. I did 2 series of a conversation with a friend, Kate Blanchett, the actor.
Just casual name drop there. The actor.
She's a mate from her days in Sydney. And we talked about these issues and some bigger ones, and went around the world visiting with entrepreneurs making a difference. Anyone wants to go to find Climate of Change.
Climate of Change. I love that. Love a pun. It's always good wordplay. Danny, thank you so much.
Nice to meet you. Good luck with that.